Well, g'day, Glen here from Happy Cow Milk, and check out these photos. It doesn't look very good. What the heck is going on? Why are farmers doing this to their cows? Well, there's some solid theory behind it, and what I want to do with these videos is explore why farmers are doing what they're doing, and you can make up your mind whether it's right or wrong. But farmers don't do things for no reason. There's a reason behind it. So let's talk about feeding cows in winter. So we need to understand grass growth rates. So in the winter, no grass grows. In the spring and the summer, lots of grass grows in New Zealand, and that's why we have a great pasture-based dairy system. So if we can pretend you're in a hot air balloon and you're looking down at a map of our farm, you basically have 24 paddocks, and cows will start in paddock 1, and every day you move them into a separate paddock. By the time 24 days later you get back to paddock 1, because you've got these high grass growth rates, we've got enough grass to feed the cows. And that's called rotational grazing, and that's what we do most of the year in New Zealand. The problem is, in May, June and July, we've got no grass growth rates. So if we come back to paddock 1, the grass hasn't grown, and we'd have to go and find feed somewhere else. So let's pretend we've got 100 cows, and if we were doing rotational grazing, you pretty much give your cows 90 metres squared per day, and that's what you see when you're driving around and you're seeing dairy farms out in the countryside, out in a big paddock sort of spread out. That's 90 metres squared, and there's about 1500 kgs of dry matter of grass in the paddock. Now, you don't need to understand what that means, just understand 1500 kgs of dry matter. If you were to do that over winter for 90 days, you'd need 84 hectares. The problem is that if you're a 100 cow dairy farm, your whole farm is only about 35 hectares. So you'd need 3 farms worth of grass to feed your cows for those 90 days, and that's not really possible. What you could do is you could just save all your grass up until you got 3,500 kgs, and you would need 36 hectares to get you through the 90 days, and the square meters per cow reduces. This is kind of what we do at Happy Cow, and we do that because we want the consistency of the milk to stay the same. We want them on grass all year round, and it costs us a bit more to do that. What most farmers do is they'll plant a crop. As you can see, fodder beet's the latest crop that everyone's been planting. 20,000 kgs of dry matter per hectare. So that's about a 500% increase in feed per hectare over grass. So crops can grow a huge amount of feed in a small area. So you only need 6.3 hectares to get your 100 cows through those 90 days. And that's why farmers do it. So if we have a look at this, pretend this is a paddock, and that's your fodder beet. If that's 200 metres, your cows would only need a 3.5 metre break fence. So it's a very small area of land. As I said, 7 metres squared. In the middle of winter, when it's wet, and that's why we get all this mud, because the cows will be standing on the ground all day long creating mud. But the cows are getting fed, that's the thing. They will probably eat their day's ration in about 4 to 5 hours, and then they'll nibble on silage or something like that. Now, why are we seeing photos like this? Well, you shouldn't see photos like that, basically. I think what's happened in this photo is the farmer has got the water trough at the end of the paddock here, and he's made the cows walk back and forwards every single day, probably multiple times a day, for 40, 50, 60 odd days, and they've just created this massive bog, and it should not happen. So what you need to do is, or farmers need to do, is just manage it properly. They need to plan B. It's the middle of winter, we're in New Zealand, we know it gets wet. And this photo here was taken about 5k down the road from where I've farmed, and we know it gets wet. You have to have alternative plans. So what you should do, or what I would do, is I would put a back fence behind here, and I would run a portable water trough from here, and you move the trough with the cows, so the cows don't have to walk anywhere to get the water. When it gets wet, you should put the cows on here for about 4 hours. When they've finished feeding, take them off and put them onto another paddock, like a big 5 hectare paddock or something, and they've got the whole paddock to spend the night on, eating silage and things like that. And they're spread out over a greater area, so they're not going to make a huge mess. Or you could put them on a feed pad, and that costs money, or something like that. But the thing is, there's options, and there's no excuse for what's happening here. But I wanted to explain why you see cows standing in mud in winter, basically because of this. Now, I suppose in later videos I might explain what are the different options, because this practice actually has quite bad environmental impacts, and it completely stuffs your soil structure as well. But that's for another day. So I hope that makes sense. Feeding cows in winter. If you've got any more questions, send me a message on Facebook, Twitter, email me, glen@happycowmilk.co.nz. Cheers. Milking cows, having cows in the New Zealand winter is difficult, and I'm not trying to say I'm perfect. This is photos of me last winter. Now this is when the sun's shining and everything's looking great and it looks lovely. This is a couple of weeks later when we'd had 2 weeks of rain, and as you can see there's a lot of mud there. Now our cows aren't knee deep in mud, they're not even ankle deep in mud, there's just a bit of mud there, and that's me standing with the leader of the Green Party and Eugenie Sage, the Associate Minister for the Environment, in my muddy paddock in the middle of winter. So I just wanted to say it is difficult. At Happy Cow we haven't solved the perfect winter grazing management yet. And actually, just to lead on, this is actually maybe better to put cows inside over the winter, and we can explore that at a later date. So anyway, we're an open book here at Happy Cow. I'm not preaching, I'm just saying that when you see these pictures of cows up to their guts in mud, that's unacceptable. I'm not saying that you should never have mud on your farm and that, you know, everything's going to be perfect. It's not. So that's just the final point.